if I get through to 2 of you, I think it'll be a success. And that's not meant a slight of you at all. Just when I was your age, I knew it all. I was the most self-assured kid on the planet. Went to my senior prom, went to the Denver broker for dinner, and I'd never had peel and eat shrimp before in my life, so I popped 2 shrimp in my mouth, and I think, man, this is really bad. This stuff is crunchy. My mom hadn't taught me about the peel part. So today, if there's any one message I want to give you, ask questions. I joked earlier that 7th grade was the 3 toughest years of my life. That takes a couple of minutes for some people to get, but three toughest years of my life. I was not in an IB program, but I would really like this not to be just a lecture and a speech, but something where you try to really pick out and learn something. If there's any one question that I think you ought to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out your career, where you want to take your life, is what would you want people to find on your desk the day after you die? Now, some of you are sitting there thinking, I'm not going to have a desk. My wife's going to take care of those bills. But really, what do you want to see? What do you want to have on your desk the day after you die? What did you just say there? Yes? There you go. Now, it's okay to talk with one another, but I may call on you just repeatedly. You guys, I grew up in Denver. I'm a 3rd-generation native. I grew up in Congress Park. Is there anybody from East High School that's still here? Congress Park is inner city. I went to a Catholic inner city school. I was the only white kid on the basketball team. I took the Colfax bus to high school. I was the 8th kid out of 9, and I always joke that I'm surprised that people invite me to speak because nobody listened to me when I was a kid, and I'm surprised they want to listen to me now. So I'm going to try to share with you some of the stuff that I've learned over the years. I have a hard time believing it was 33 years ago that I was in your seat. So when I was a senior in high school, I had 3 older brothers and sisters in college. My dad had died when I was 6. Mom raised 9 kids by herself, and there was no money, just no money. So I applied for a bunch of different scholarships, but I didn't know the fall of my junior year or the spring of my senior year that I was going to make it to college. Had no clue that I was going to make it to college, and if I did, I figured I'd have, be paying college loans back for years and years and years. This is a college information day. We want to encourage you to go to college, and I want you to have a little bit of different attitude than I did. For college, for me, we were so poor, I wanted to make money. I didn't really care if I enjoyed the career I was in. I wanted to make money because we had no money growing up. And fortunately, I fell into the energy industry where I could make money, but I fell in love with the industry. I mean, fell in love with the industry. And I'll show you some pictures here now. First, we're going to get 2 boring slides. World primary energy demand. No matter what anybody tells you, we're not going to be powering the world in 2030 with just renewables. We need fossil fuels. Hands down, we cannot power the world with an intermittent resource. Intermittent meaning you can't predict when it's going to come on and off. I was talking to some of you guys at lunchtime. You would never promise your kid or your grandkid or your cousin or your brother that you'd take them to go fly a kite tomorrow, or that you'd have perfect weather for a party down the road, because there's an unpredictable nature of both sun and wind, and we all know it too well. So we need a baseload resource, and as much as I personally dislike coal because of its pollution, I think we're going to have coal-fired electric generation for a long, long time. This slide supports that. So I'm in the natural gas business, okay? Look at the global natural gas demand as it's gone up over the years. That's conventional resources, and I'll explain conventional and unconventional a little bit. Now, that first number was the reserve to production ratio. The second number is the reserve to production. That's how much gas we have in the ground versus how much we know we're producing. We are going to need natural gas through your grandkids and great-grandkids' timeline. And I think the natural gas industry is the perfect one to jump into. This is the big slide. This is the slide that will impact your lives, the facts behind this slide more than anything else. This is the population curve growth from 1950 to 2050. And just look at the far left-hand side. That very first column is 1950. The second one is 2000. Take a look at India and China. Look at their growth from 1950 to 2000. Think of that growth from 1950 to 2000, and then imagine that 2 weeks ago, right now, I was in Chengdu, China, teaching a class to the Chinese about how to open up their markets for natural gas. How to open up their markets for natural gas. This is communist China, and I'm trying to teach them how the market works in the U.S. and all the mistakes that we've made over 50 years from a regulatory standpoint. And I was a kid 33 years ago that wondered if I'd make it to college. The beautiful part about this story is they asked me to come over, and I said, you know, I don't want to be away from my family that long, for 2 weeks. So I'll tell you what, I'll waive my fee if you pick up the tab to take my wife and 3 kids over there also. And they said yes. It's amazing where your career might take you. It's hard to see right now, but 2 of those 3 kids have bright red hair. And I might as well have gone over there with George Clooney because those kids, at least 100 times in 2 weeks, they had their picture taken with someone that had never seen either a Caucasian or a Caucasian with a redhead. I mean, it was a stunning, stunning trip. So much so, is it real? Yes, that is real red hair. No, that is a real panda. That the company that sponsored my trip over there, PetroChina, is the biggest natural gas producer in China, and they actually are one of the biggest contributors to the International Panda Reserve. And so Mr. Joe, who's the #2 guy at PetroChina that I just met by happenstance because I volunteered to teach them about regulations when a trade mission came through here 2 years ago, Mr. Joe arranged for us to go sit down next to a panda. I did not put the picture of me on there because I had a really weird look on my face. Each time we would exchange somebody into that picture, they'd wipe honey on that panda's claws. So the panda was sitting there licking its claws as we're moving through in the pictures. My daughter that wants to go to CSU, I was telling somebody that had a CSU jersey on, has now been invited to go back there in 5 years when she turns 16 and work for a month in the International Panda Reserve. When I was your age, I was like, man, high school were the best years of my life. I really thought that high school was the best years of my life, and I was depressed about becoming a statistic, marrying somebody, having 2.2 kids, living in suburbia, and having a real boring job. Now, I don't know how many of you guys feel that way. I hope you don't, but I certainly did back then. And I would never have guessed the opportunities that my career, the one that I went into just to make money, would present to me. This is another one of those slides that I hope you remember forever, but quality of life is directly correlated to electricity consumption. There are 1.36 billion people in China. 300 million of those people, equal to the U.S. population, don't have any electricity. And they're not going to put up with that much longer. They're going to come into the light and out of the dark ages. But it's incredible when you think what kind of energy demand we're going to have going forward when just India and China come up to the standard that we have. It's astonishing what's going to happen in terms of demand for natural gas, demand for oil. In China, China has to import 30% of its natural gas from overseas. 30%. Here in the U.S., we import 11% from our neighbor to the north and 1% from overseas. We have a tremendous advantage over the other countries in that we have so much of our own natural gas production here. In Europe, by 2020, 70% of the EU countries' natural gas supply will be coming from Russia. And if you want to study the baddest person on the planet, go look up Vladimir Putin. I mean it. This guy, he formed a cartel with Iran and Qatar 4 years ago that was a natural gas cartel. 73 times Russia has cut off natural gas supply to its neighboring country to renegotiate the contract. And guess what the anniversary of the contract is? December 31st. In the dead of winter, do you want to be renegotiating your contract? The last time they did it with the Ukraine, they said, you know what, we want to jump your price from $3 a unit to $14. And the Ukraine said, no, too big a growth. We can't do that. So they said, okay, we'll make you a deal. This is after shutting off gas supply for 3 days in the dead of winter. You know what, we want to own all the pipelines in your country, and we'll give you gas for a year for $7, double your price. Guess what the Ukraine said? Okay. If you want to understand politics, and you can't avoid politics in any business, if you want to understand international politics, understand energy. I'm giving this speech to the guys at Chengdu, and they flew Chengdu, China. PetroChina flew people in from 8 different cities. I had 100 people in this class, a translator for 2 days, telling them how we screwed up on regulations of natural gas over the last 100 years so they wouldn't make the same mistakes. And I said at one point in time, China, you've got to understand, for every dollar you send overseas when you buy natural gas, you don't reinvest that in the country. You need to develop the wealth that you have in this country. You need to develop the wealth you have in this country. And I said, Taiwan, Korea, And Japan, South Korea and Japan, do not have the same options as countries as you do because they have no indigenous gas supply that they can develop. A day passes, we finally open it up for additional questions, and the oldest guy in the audience stands up and says through an interpreter, "Mr. Harpole, you made a terrible mistake." Or is it, okay, what terrible mistake? You referred to Taiwan as a separate country, and it's not a separate country. I really stepped on it there, but my point was, and I cleared it up, my point was, guys, there is so much out there that you can learn through energy, and so much out there you can learn about politics. The two are intertwined. They're intertwined here in the state of Colorado. They're here intertwined in the county of Weld County. The more questions you can ask during the course of the career that I think you'll have, the better off you are. This is a great slide because it shows you where people are. Third generation native of Colorado. I had flown twice by the time I was 18, flown an airplane twice. In 1987, I was put in charge of buying natural gas for all the General Electric industrial plants in the U.S. 84 of my 85 plants were east of the Mississippi, so I was flying to those plants, trying to show them how to buy natural gas from me instead of from a utility. When you take a look at where the people are in this country, and then where the coal plants are that are polluting coal plants, and then where this new breakthrough is for taking natural gas out of a shale formation that until 4 years ago we could never do it, you can guess what's probably going to happen here. 45 of the top 75 coal polluting plants in the country are right on top of what we call the Marcellus shale plant. Now you say shale, what does shale mean to me? For years we only pulled natural gas out of a sedimentary formation. And the only way that gas stayed in that formation is because it had a cap rock of shale that's as hard as the stone underneath your pool table that kept the gas from migrating up to the surface. But we knew that shale was a oil or gas-bearing rock. We knew that it was there, but we could never quite figure out how to pull gas out of there because there's no communication in that shale rock. There's no what we call porosity or permeability or discussion between the pores of that shale rock. And so now, and I mentioned it earlier, we can drill down 3 miles, drill through a formation no thicker than this room is tall 3 miles, and hit a target the size of a refrigerator. And then when we drill through that formation horizontally instead of vertically, we contact that shale in, say, a 3,000-foot section, crack that shale rock, fill the cracks with sand, and the oil and gas comes out of that. That's something that we've developed in the last 4 years. And by developing that, we don't have to import natural gas from overseas anymore. That's called hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. And in this last 4 years, we've suddenly realized that all those shale formations are ones that we can chase after. A good friend of mine who lives here in Denver helped his dad drill a well in the Appalachian Basin in West Virginia 30 years ago. They developed acreage and developed oil and gas wells all over West Virginia and Pennsylvania. 2 years ago, he woke up and realized he had the Marcellus shale play underneath his existing 40-year-old production. That man today is probably the wealthiest man in Colorado that you've never heard of, and I'm talking about billions of dollars of value. He has at least 14 trillion cubic feet of gas under his existing production. Now, what does TCF mean? On the coldest day of the year, in the whole Front Range of Denver, we'll burn about 1.8 billion cubic feet of gas, 1.8 BCF of gas. An LNG tanker can hold 3 billion cubic feet of gas. If you freeze natural gas, you reduce the size that it takes from a beach ball to a ping pong ball. If you freeze it, you reduce it 246 times in size. So 3 billion cubic feet of gas is enough natural gas to heat 40,000 homes for a year, and 30% of the gas that comes into China is on an LNG tanker. 1% of what we use here in the U.S. comes in on an LNG tanker. That's the freedom that we have in a world where Vladimir Putin has a cartel and he's going to control Europe, for my all intents and purposes, by supplying 70% of the gas to Europe by 2020. Almost every Eastern European country is reliant on gas from Russia to the tune of 100%. How would you like to be negotiating with somebody that determines whether or not you're going to be warm or cold in the winter? It's a tough deal. But then also, how would you like to be in an industry that's going to pull gas out of a shale formation, this new technology that actually sees the changing of the guard between coal and gas and the determination of who fires electric generation? This is the story that's going to evolve. And when I was in China, I gave 100 years of regulatory issues, went back 100 years, talked about all the mistakes we made, and I realized the ability to pull gas out of a shale formation, again, something we discovered 4 years ago, will change this country and changes international politics for the better. I mean, it is a huge story that, again, not enough people understand. When we talk about conventional gas is what we always pulled out gas out of a sedimentary formation, stuff that we knew how to do 50, 60 years ago. Those are all the different basins here that have unconventional gas. Unconventional gas is gas that's pulled out of a coal bed formation. You remember hearing the story about a parakeet in a coal mine? A parakeet dies if there's natural gas or methane in there. You always have natural gas deposited with coal. And so we were so desperate for it 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, that we were drilling the coal formations to pull the gas out of there. You wouldn't get as much for the effort as you did out of conventional, but it was still gas. These are the shale basins that we now know exist, that you guys were not exploring for oil and gas anymore. We're manufacturing it in the U.S. We know it's there. The cheapest manufacturer in a particular basin will be the company that survives. We've gone from having maybe 60 years of natural gas reserves to, I would argue, over 300 now. Something that we never could say before. And what's always killed us in the game to try to capture electric generation was the fact that we had very volatile prices. Mr. Joe, who I was visiting with in China, sits on a committee with 4 other people where he sets the price for natural gas once a year. Can you imagine the power in that centralized economy to say, okay, we need the natural gas price to be this next year. Here in the U.S., we have a free market, a floating market, where we saw the price get to as high as $14 a unit. It's about $4 a unit now. It got to as high as $14 a unit 3.5 years ago, which was the price signal in this free market economy that allowed people to figure out how to extract gas out of a shale formation. So our free market works here, something that was never and would never have been discovered in China or Russia, because they were not incented to go after this stuff because it was so expensive to chase. Here's the story. Evolution-wise, we used to just drill a vertical well straight down. Then we started going into these vertical wells and literally popping holes in the pipe, going into the formation and trying to fracture that formation with high pressure. And then we started using multiple stage fracs from 1994, and now look what we can do. Again, 3 miles down, 3 miles through a formation, 10 feet thick, and hitting a target the size of a refrigerator. Now, if you're interested in engineering, that's some pretty astonishing engineering. But let's look back to 1940. 1940, we had about as many miles of gas pipeline as China does today. China uses about 10% of the natural gas we use here. And in the time period from 1940 to right now, we have 1.6 million miles of underground gas pipelines. 1.6 million miles. You remember that overhead, that satellite photo at night where the people were? Take a look at where the production is in Oklahoma, Texas, offshore, panhandle of Texas, and where the people are. And so then imagine all the regulation to put that pipe in the ground, to monitor that pipe, which unfortunately wasn't monitored too well in San Francisco. If you saw that explosion happen a few months ago, or it was while I was in China about 3 weeks ago. I think there were 7 people now, 7, 8 people killed. They were still using some old cast iron pipe, not steel pipe, and they'd not replaced it. It lost pressure and it blew up. You know, we deal with a product that I joke with my kids that it's the only product I know of that I sell that if you smell it, you run from it. You know, it is a product that is flammable, and that's the attractive nature of it. But it's something that, imagine building 1.6 million miles of pipeline. Back in 1905, they used to manufacture natural gas. Nobody was really drilling for it. What they used to do is burn coal, turn that coal into natural gas, and fill up a diaphragm or this huge, huge facility with natural gas so they could pipe that natural gas out to gas lights throughout cities. So you never had the movement of natural gas from one city to the next. You just had the use of it city by city by city. That's the kind of gaslight that was actually being used in 1909 in Boston. Kids would play pool by a gaslight. Other kids, if you were born down in West Virginia, were doing something different. If you lived in West Virginia, at your age by now, you would have been in a coal mine, hands down. What I'm asking you to do is think about being the gas industry down the road. Look at those kids. They loved to use kids back then because they were small, And it was a lot of room and pillar kind of mining, where the smaller the kid, the better the kid. That's what coal used to look like in Michigan. This is what we used to use for digging a ditch for a pipe. That was the 1929 distribution pipeline that was put into Salt Lake, one of the first cities to convert entirely to natural gas in the western U.S. This is how we use kids in the pipeline business. You'd actually have to bend pipe, and so they'd take kids out to the field and have them stand on a pipe to bend the pipe to make a curve with the earth as they laid pipe. This is one of my favorite pictures in all the years I've been in the business. They used to dig by hand and finish out the pipe. So again, imagine 1.6 million miles of pipe that was laid this way. That's a city gate interconnection where the interstate pipeline meets the utility distribution system that grew up around that diaphragm that used to supply gas. This is how they used to dig ditches up the hill in 1940. There was a huge expansion of natural gas pipelines during World War II, where we built a lot of capacity out of the south up to the north, where all the manufacturing was, where we saw so many different aircraft engine planes. This is actually an aircraft engine plant in Fort Worth, where they built pipelines from the Texas Panhandle to Fort Worth to supply natural gas. This is a picture I love just because the lady has curlers in her hair. But the regulations were tied up in knots, and I lifted a lot of this presentation from my presentation to China because we made so many mistakes. In 1930, the federal government set the price for natural gas, and that's exactly what's happening in China right now. In 2007, China, the Chinese, the 5-member committee decided, hey, we're going to lower the price for the fertilizer industry. 95% of fertilizer comes from natural gas. What you see comes from natural gas. So they lowered the price for the fertilizer industry. Fertilizer industry, budding capitalists that they are in China, decided, hey, let's overproduce. They overproduced, sold a bunch of it abroad, made a bunch of money, and that money was then now reinvested in the drilling in China. Same sort of thing happened. What the Chinese want to understand are the mistakes we made for 50 years and how they get around that. But I'll tell you, it's always been an uphill battle fighting these regulations and making people aware of what's going on. This is a pipeline that was being put in the mountains outside of Salt Lake just a few months ago, a couple of years ago. Rather than go through that, but during those 50 years, and this is something I pulled off the internet, and strangely enough, it was the Chinese yuan dollar in there, a lot of lost opportunities when the central market tries to determine what the natural gas price will be. When you ask about jobs, how am I doing on time, Jamie? Okay. There are jobs from what I call the wellhead to the burner tip, and then I'll imagine all the environmental issues, all the regulatory issues, and all the political issues attached to it. We move gas from the wellhead. It comes out not in the same kind of content and shape and specification that it is at your home in your hot water heater, so we have to clean it up. 2 weeks ago, I heard about a crew that was going in and sucking condensate, a liquid that drips out of a gathering line. Gas comes out, it's got a lot of liquids in it. Some very dishonest truckers were going out and sucking that liquid that dripped out of the line before it got to a processing plant and selling it. And there's some speculation that in 10 years, they ran off with $20 million. 30 different people were fired from this company because they found out about it. Although the larger world doesn't know about this thing yet, but there are so many different ways to cheat the system and so many regulations or checkpoints that we put into place now that it doesn't happen, that we have a very, very mature system as it relates to other countries. Again, I mentioned in the middle, there are 300,000 miles of pipelines on the interstate side going state to state. Utilities, 894,000 that are owned by investors. Municipal cities like City of Colorado Springs has their own system, 300,000 miles. So obviously for many, many years we've been bent over a pipe. Not quite connected, finally got connected. We have a connected market now in the sense that we have regulations and a lot of experience in knowing how to transport it, how to watch for open markets, how to make sure that somebody isn't abusing how that price discovery happens. And every chance some smart capitalist can have to change and extract more from that market than they should have, they've done it. But for the most part, things are working. Okay, this is the estimate of remaining natural gas reserves in the U.S. lower 48 states. We have a lot of gas, you guys. We have a lot of coal plants that need to be converted, and I think it's a great industry to go into. Across the world, there are 142 shale basins that have been identified that, thanks to a few independent producers down in Fort Worth, Texas, we can chase after now. And again, I can't emphasize enough that breakthrough of drilling through that shale formation, what it means to this industry, and what it means for the need that we have to have smart, young, capable people to go into that business. This is the Unconventional Gas Resources estimate. Take a look at North America. Take a look at the former Soviet Union. Some pretty astonishing numbers. But there are just so many politics and things involved in natural gas that, again, I don't think we'll have enough young, bright people move into it. Back in 2005, we thought we had 192 trillion cubic feet of gas. Take a look at just 5 shale basin plays now, and what we think is just in those basins as compared to what we thought we had in 2004. Now I'm going to get into something a little bit controversial. This is a typical day for the electric generation guy at Public Service Company. So it's a 24-hour time period, and they're bopping along using coal. It's kind of hard to see in these lights. Bopping along using coal. That's the primary generation resource for electricity, and then wind comes on. And as you know, in Colorado, we're supposed to get 30% of our wind, of our energy, electric generation from wind by 2020. 30%. We're right at about 11% right now. Well, when wind comes on the grid, coal has to go down, and those coal plants were not meant to be cycled down. They want to run 24/7. Imagine sitting behind an RTD bus, and that bus accelerates at a stoplight, away from a stoplight. That bus really runs best going 80 miles an hour down the highway. What we've discovered is that the ramping or cycling up and down of those coal plants has actually caused a higher rate of pollution, even when you count in the benefit of wind energy. So my point to you today is ask questions. Don't assume that everything you hear in the newspaper, everything you hear in the hype about renewable energy, sustainable energy, that sort of thing is true. I'm not opposed to renewable energy, but wind energy, because of the cyclability and availability of natural gas, wind energy needs to be backed up by natural gas, not coal. And again, I guarantee you, none of you have heard about this. This is something you're going to hear about more and more and more. There's about 10% of the coal fleet, the coal electric generation fleet in the U.S., is scheduled to retire. It's depreciated, fully depreciated, scheduled to retire in the next 7-8 years. Nearly all of that will be captured by natural gas, because natural gas has virtually no nitrous oxide. 10% of the sulfur dioxide that coal has, no mercury, and half the CO2. So again, natural gas and oil, we've got 5 minutes left. Go through this. What we discovered is that the coal plants that were being cycled in the ozone non-attainment area of the Front Range 7 counties, the coal plants that were being cycled were actually exacerbating the air pollution issue. And that's why you'll hear some coal plants are being switched to natural gas. That's going to happen probably first here in Colorado, and you're going to see it happen back east. Now I want to ask you some questions if I can. Can electricity be stored? Can you store electricity? Does anybody have an opinion? The question, great. I like this guy already. It depends on how much you need to have stored. We cannot store electricity in any utility scale size yet. That's something that escaped my nephew, who graduated from Notre Dame and Duke Law School. He thought that transformers outside of cities were actually places where you captured electricity. Please remember, with electricity, and this is a physics issue, you're either generating it, transmitting it, or using it. We still haven't figured out to store electricity in a scalable economic way. How many of you believe mankind is responsible for global warming? Raise your hand. Don't be shy. How many of you believe mankind is responsible for global warming? Define responsible. It's a commonly, widely accepted thing right now, but the science on that one, as far as I'm concerned, is not over. I don't agree with Mr. Gore there.
I say mankind has trouble realizing how responsible it isn't.
Then I am definitely one of those guys that's having a hard time not determining if I'm responsible enough. What did you say? What school do you go to?
Just look at it back in the our CO2 levels were up over 600-700 parts per million, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not.
Here's a story that, and this just bothers me, but I've actually gone back to Ireland. You guys, my career has taken me to China. I've been in the White House Situation Room 3 times with different folks. I've been to Ireland to negotiate a deal. When I went back to Ireland, I actually caught up with some cousins, some second cousins there, and visited the west coast of Ireland, County Mayo. The Jordan family that I came from actually had a castle in County Mayo called Wraith House. And Wraith House was named for that because they grew grapes in County Mayo in the Middle Ages and made wine. Okay, so it was warm enough in County Mayo, Ireland to grow grapes. And yet when I went back and looked at who correlated what the temperatures were in Ireland against tree ring technology, dendrochronology, to determine what the temperatures were, it was the very Michael Mann that was caught up in the scandal over the emails on what global warming is about. All I'm telling you, I may be wrong or right, but through your career, ask questions. Ask questions. It's not the answers that you provide, but the ability to ask a smart question, and don't assume that anybody is right. There are probably 4 or 5 people in this room, and I'll wrap it up with this, that are brilliant, that are going to make it in their lives. They're brilliant. The rest of us are pretty average, okay? And it's okay to be average, but if you're average with a good attitude, believe me, you're going to make it. I grew up, 9 kids, Catholic, went to a Catholic grade school, and this one nun used to drive us crazy saying 7/8 of everything is attitude of mind. Well, believe me, I've got folks in my office that work for me right now, and guess who's probably not going to be working for the company next year? Equally talented, but the person who has the bad attitude. Show up on time. Ask good questions. Don't assume that everybody is right. Don't assume that the question you want to ask is embarrassing because everybody else knows the answer. More often than not, it's that very question that'll set you apart from other folks. Today, I got to tell you, I've given speeches probably 30 times in the last 12 months, and I was more nervous about talking to you guys and keeping your attention, but more importantly, trying to impart some bit of wisdom to you that I've gained over the years. But if a kid can make it out of Congress Park and wind up somehow in China teaching a class, or at the White House, which really wasn't that impressive, to be honest with you. The Situation Room is so small, you've got to go like this to get around the chairs, between the chairs and the wall. If I can make it there, you can do just about anything, but you better have a good attitude, you better show up on time, and you better ask good questions. So thank you all for your attention today. I appreciate it. Questions now. All right, I've thrown you down the gauntlet. You got to ask good questions now. The pressure is so great. Yes, sir.
In regards to not just your company, but all of the natural oil or natural gas companies around the world that you were mentioning, how much of it do you think is, do you think it's driven, like it should be driven more by ethics or money?
That's a great question. It really is. I'm a firm believer that you guys don't have ethics by now, you're not going to get taught it in college. Okay? I'm a firm believer that you weren't taught ethics at home, you're not going to have it in grade school. Okay? Ethically, right now, I know that I could have made a lot more money if I was less than ethical. But at the end of the day, and this is the question that I think I posed to you, what do you want somebody to find on your desk the day after you die? Really, think about that. What kind of impression do you want to leave the world? Somebody's cleaning up your desk. Do they want to see where you owe 3 people that are close friends a bunch of money and nobody knew about it? Or do they want to see where you wrote checks to put some other kid through college? Again, I'd love to say that, you know, people think there's no ethics in the oil business. I found just the opposite. I found incredible ethics. And it really ticks me off to hear that there might be a couple of dozen guys in the field that figured out some way to scam the business. But there's a special place in hell for people that do that. The only thing that you can control is your own integrity. And you can't teach ethics. It's something you learn at a very, very young age. I hope that answered your question. There was one up here.
I was just wondering, like, you seem to be someone who understands the politics of what's going on with like energy and stuff, like there's a lot of regulations saying like we need to restrict how much of the energy comes from these sources here. Is that like good or bad for the industry?
We're the only country in the world that prohibits drilling in some part of our country. And in many respects, that may be a good thing. But you guys, I've been to parts of this country that aren't even the armpit of the country, that they're the part of your back that you can't see and feel and wash and clean. You know, there's nothing out there. One of those was named Jonah, the Jonah Field in southwest Wyoming. They figure about 7 people a year used to go through that, and now supplies 2 billion cubic feet of gas a day to Colorado, Utah, Nevada, California. And yet when I was involved in developing that field, we had to stop the development of that field for 18 months so we could determine whether or not the compressors that we have that help move gas through a pipeline, that the air would disturb or the noise would disturb the sage-grouse strutting grounds, that they allow people to hunt. I mean, you know, that's the kind of thing, ask the question. I think it's terrific that we're environmentalists. Is there anybody in this room that's not an environmentalist? Please raise your hand. Okay, he's sketchy over there. You can see the hair. He's got oil in his hair. We're all environmentalists. We all love this country. We love our city. But ask the question, have we gone too far? Do you realize that if we're in ozone non-attainment, the state has to put in an implementation plan to get us into ozone attainment? And down in Texas, around Dallas, the second worst ozone non-attainment behind LA in the country, they've actually discussed days where you cannot drive your car. Mandatory mass transit days. Mass transit is free, and if you're a large employer of more than 200 people, you have to charge money for people to park at your facility. That's why we're attacking the coal plants first, even though they're not the largest contributor to ozone. There's a lot of freedom out there, and I think a lot of things that people don't understand. And remember, I came from a low-income family. Nobody was advocating for my family in terms of the cost of utility generation. About a year before my mom passed away 10 years ago, just 2 more minutes, and I'll make it.
One last question after.
2 more minutes. I asked my mom, I said, Mom, do you have any old utility bills? And she was not a pack rat, couldn't afford to be with 9 kids. After Thanksgiving dinner, she came upstairs and handed me 38 years of utility bills from the same gas meter. I said, Mom, why were you saving these? There were 38 years of bills in these 2 boxes. And I was kind of being a smart ass, and I said, Mom, why are you saving these? She goes, well, I wasn't sure if I could pay next month's bill. So I'd keep track of the weather that we had, similar weather we had, to see if I could maybe move money around, which meant borrow a little money from my uncles to pay the bill. Not one of those bills over the critical time period of our family was more than $80 a month. Go ask your parents tonight, a little homework, what their utility bill was in July of last year and what it was in December of last year. Go ask. It's over $300, easily over $300, and that's starting to approach the low and middle income, 50% of what their income might be. I sit on the Energy Outreach Colorado board, and I'm really concerned about some of the directions we're going on energy and its impact on the low income, and the transfer of wealth that's going to have to occur to make sure those people don't turn off their thermostats. There was one more question. Yes, ma'am. Natural gas? We actually export out of Kenai, Alaska. There's been about a 20-year deal with Tokyo Electric and Gas where we liquefy natural gas up in Alaska, and it's about 3 boats a month now, so 9 BCF a month that goes down to Tokyo Electric and Gas. Alaska, if you've ever been up there are really no roads between the cities, and so they made a gas discovery up there, and they actually freeze that gas and export it because there's no demand up there. So, yes, we do. You guys have bright eyes. Keep it up. Keep asking questions. Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.